Doing? Welcome to Livestream number 91. Today is Wednesday. It is November 15th, 2017. Thank you so much for taking the time to join today's Livestream. We are going to talk today about the Heights tab within CAM. So if you are not interested in CAM, then just kick back, take the day off. I'm just making up for last week where I was out a few days. So normally I was saying that CAM is going to be on Fridays. Well, we're going to have it today and we're going to have it on this upcoming Friday too. So today's all about CAM. We're going to talk about the Heights tab. And this was actually a suggestion from Ben, who sent me an email and asked me if I could talk about the Heights tab because it can be a little confusing and it's kind of important. But I honestly believe, and you be the judge, you let me know, thumbs up, thumbs down, like, if I do a decent job after today, you should be all set with the Heights tab. You be the judge, you let me know. So, if you go down watching the recording, in the description area, you will find my email address, lars.christensen@autodesk.com. That's where Ben sent the request for today's video. So, do that if you have anything you would like to see. Also, and I'm going to jump into it now, but also just quickly want to say that tonight, it's Wednesday, it is November 15th. Tonight, about 10 after 8, around right after 8 o'clock, 5-10 minutes past 8, I am going to do a live stream on Facebook. We're going to call that like the answer bar or something like that. A little bit more kickback. Going to do it on Facebook. So if you have a Facebook account, go in and search my name, Fusion360. I should come up. It's going to be more for beginners. It's not going to be, high level. I want to actually take the time to try to answer some questions as I'm going back and forth. So if you are already a CAD ninja, Facebook live streams on Wednesday evenings is probably not for you. But if you I think many of us sometimes we're a little insecure about what is actually the right approach. That's tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. That's the same time in New York City. Okay, done with me rambling. Let's go ahead and talk about the Heights tab because somebody is watching this video just for that. Thank you so much, guys. So, I have this model here. And I just kind of modeled this up. There's nothing too fancy about this. We got a couple of pockets. We got kind of this cylinder shape down here, and we got some holes. What I wanted to do was, I really hate when it turns into to kind of like a cooking show where everything have already been prepared. So I actually wanted to go into CAM and start from scratch and throw some Toolpath in this one. So if you've never seen CAM before, well, you can kind of see the process here. We're going to talk about the Heights tab. And what the Heights tab is kind of like the distance the tools are moving between pockets or holes or something like that. So pretty important. And I'm going to show what I think are some pretty neat tips with that. So let's get going. So the first thing you do in CAM is you hit setup. You're creating a setup. Normally, I always use only the Select Z X plane. I don't use any of the other ones. I've talked about this in the past. I'm not going to dive too deep into this. I'm just going to select the top of the part here. Now, there is a couple of things that's going to be important when we are talking about the heights. So we're talking about the tool moving around on this part. And we're going to dive pretty far into this. But one of them is, where are we picking up the part? So we're doing that with selecting normally like a box point. If you're selecting stock box point, then you need to know that you're selecting whatever you have in your stock options for the top offsets. So, normally you're leaving a little bit of material on top. Now you got to decide when you're touching the tool off, if you're touching that on top of the part, or if you are going to subtract whatever. Like, let's see, there was no material left on the top. Then you would not have any. You could make this 0, the stock top offset, Or you could go in here, instead of do a stock box point, you could select model box point and select a point. So that's just one of the things to keep in mind. We're going to see this happening as we're going through and talking a little bit deeper about this. Right now, I'm going to leave it on stock point, what it means that there is a millimeter of stock on top of our part here. I'm going to hit OK to that. And let me just apply some toolpath. Now, normally when we apply toolpath to a part like this, we might start out with a facing operation. So I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to go in and select a tool. And when I'm creating these tools right now, bear with me. I'm not going to go in to all the different settings, but I just wanted to do it from scratch. So I'm going to select the 50 millimeters end mill, and I'm going to select all the tools, all the operations, and then we're going to go back into the height tab. So selecting the tool, that's always the first tab, right? Because I'm just facing off this block, I actually don't have to select any geometry. I'm going to hit OK. And I now have a facing operation in here that you now are aware of. Now, if I go back in and edit that operation, yes, we have the height tab over here. So this is the one we're gonna be talking about in a few minutes here. I'm just gonna add a couple of more operations. So we faced off the part. Maybe we also wanna rough out these two pockets. We could go in and use a 2D adaptive clearing for that. Again, I'm going to go over and select a new tool for that here because we don't want to use a face end mill for that. I'm going to go down. I'm selecting out of the tutorial metric library here. Select the 16 millimeter. And then I'm going to go over on the geometry tab and select the two inner circles here. Now, again, here you will also see there is the heights tab. Again, that's the one we're gonna talk about. Now, the reason that I'm selecting multiple operations is because the height tabs kind of does different things depending on what operation you're in. So there is our two pockets roughed out. Now, when we have roughed those out, we might want to finish them. Normally, we use a 2D contour for that. We might select a smaller tool for that, but right now I'm just going to leave it at the 16 and go in and select those two same diameters. That will give us a finishing operation for that. I might also want to take a pass around the outside. So I could use that little trick by going over right click and say create derived operation and go into 2D milling and find that same contour toolpath. That means that all my settings, if I had customized anything in the different tabs, gets carried over. Only thing I have to do is deselect the two chains and select the outside. So if you didn't know about that little trick, I am also gonna go in and do 3-axis toolpath on this part because height tabs are still important when it comes to 3-axis toolpath. So I'm actually gonna rough out this little oval pocket right here. Just bear with me here. I'm going to select a little bit smaller end mill for that because it's a pretty small pocket. So go in here. I'll select the 10 millimeter flat end mill for that. Now, I have done a live stream on selection within when it comes to machining geometry on 3-axis. So if this is fairly new to you, I would recommend that you check out that live stream. I'm going to go in here and say I want to machine the cavities and probably also leave some stock to leave here. And that will rough out this pocket. Then we're going to finish it. For that, I'm going to use the parallel cuts. Again, I've created videos on some of this 3-axis toolpath if this is brand new for you. But I just want to, make sure that when we're done with this live stream in, 20 minutes or so, that you have a full take, feel comfortable with the height tab. So I'm going to select the 6 millimeter ball end mill, a little bit smaller than the 10 millimeter we just used before. Again, go into the geometry in here. I'm going to do also select the selection to select that boundary. I like to use this contact point boundary for that. Let's hit OK. That looks somewhat decent down there. That's a good toolpath. Maybe if you're machining this in real life, you'll probably have, you would have a lot smaller step over. All right, to wrap this up, I'm just going to do a drilling. Then I've kind of been through, I would say, most of the standard toolpath there is, and we can then start talking about this height tab here that I'm trying to get at. I'm lazy, select same diameter, click on that there, and then it will drill these holes. Okay, so we created a handful of different operations in here. And when we're talking about the height tab, we're talking about, if I click on the facing tool, we're talking about how the tool is going to approach the part, machine the part, and then how it's going to kind of like leave the part again to go to the next tool path, what in this case is the adaptive, and it will enter the part. But then the interesting thing comes when we start talking about it's got to make this jump across to the second pocket. And that's where I think that many times people get a little bit confused when it comes to tweaking things in here. So I hope that this was not too long a setup to getting to the point, but let's go in and kind of like digest the different types of toolpath and start tweaking them and talk about the height tab. So the reason that I didn't just do a facing operation is because if I right click and hit edit on the facing operation and I go over to the heights tab, you will see that there's actually 5 different categories in here. But if I go to the adaptive and hit edit and heights tab, you'll see there's only 4. It's kind of funny. I think that most machinists would tell me that facing operations would be a lot simpler than a 2D adaptive. But for heights tab, actually not so much. So here is the trick when it comes to the heights tab. I always tell any training classes that I do in CAM, start from the top and just work your way through the different menus. So when you get in here to tool, select your tool, choose your coolant, make sure your feed to speeds are right, go into your selection, make sure you got selected. Now when it comes to the heights tab, I actually recommend you're going from the bottom and up. Okay? Start from the bottom and work your way up. The reason for that is that if you have ever programmed a CNC machine, the bottom is normally like your first concern. How deep is this end mill or drill or whatever tool actually going down to, what is the lowest level it goes? And then if you start with that, then you can kind of work your way up. So in here, you will see that by default, the bottom depth right now is set from model top. Now, if I hover over it, I get this Cheesecake Factory of a menu that shows up here, showing you all different kinds of things. Get a cup of coffee, read through this. It's good information and definitely a lot of helpful. Now, what happens when I click on the drop down is you will see that I can choose where that bottom, let me click outside, what that bottom height, where that is. So by default here, for this facing operation, it's set to model top. What means that when our tool is approaching the part, it's not going to machine any deeper than the model top. But it's good, right? Like, that's kind of like, we can breathe a sigh of relief, because if a face mill went down to the bottom of that would be ugly. So that is where you can look at that. Now, if we go and look at the 2D adaptive, that goes down to these 2 pockets. If we right click and select edit there and go to the heights tab, go down to the bottom, you will see that that bottom height is from the selected contours. What the selected contours are, if I go back to the geometry tab, those 2 edges that I selected at the bottom of the pocket. What means that right now, the adaptive looks pretty good, right? It machines all the way down to the bottom of this pocket. Now, if I go in and I change the change, so instead of like the bottom, I select the top and I hit OK. See what happens now? It will not go any further down than that selected edge that I have selected, because on the heights tab, it's set to the selected contours, meaning the contours that I selected, right? Now you have different options in here. Yeah, I could go in here and say, I actually, instead of doing selected contours, I am going to hit selection. Now, if I hit selection, it's looking for somewhere, what is that selection? And I could actually now select the bottom of those two pockets and hit OK. And now it will be back to where I want it, okay? So that's how this kind of like works in here. Now, I could also go in here and say, for example, model bottom, and select that. And now you will see that it's going to go all the way. I mean, that's going to not be good because now it actually goes all the way down to the bottom here, okay? So concentrate. The first thing we should always do is concentrate on that bottom height. That's the first one. And just make sure that that has the right height. If that is good, that is the most important thing. Now, anybody ever played with Legos? That is kind of like how this works. So after the bottom height, we go one up and look at that. Now, the one on top of that is set to what is the top height. Kind of like telling us where is the zero, Z0, for our tool. Now, right now, it is set to stock top. Okay? So stock top, well, that would be, if we go into our setup, where we were before, that would be that 1 millimeter, that is the stock top that is on top of the part. Okay? Now, if so we have now eliminated these two. So this is the top height. Now the next one is retract height. This is when it moved from one pocket to the other pocket. What is the height it should be at when it's traveling from one pocket to the other? That is stock top. What we just defined was the same one we had here, top height, right? That is 1 millimeter above plus 5 millimeters. So actually a total of 6 millimeters, right? Because we had from the top of the model, because we had 1 millimeter on the stock, and then we are going 5 millimeters above that. So we should actually clear this area here with 6 millimeters, because this is after the facing operation. And then when we go to the clearance height, now clearance height is when the tool approaches from the beginning, like when you hit the green cycle start button, and it's going to approach this operation. When it's approaching the adaptive operation, it's going to do a clearance height, and the clearance height is the retract height. What was this here? And that was 6 millimeters above the model top, or 5 millimeters above the stock top. So it's that retract height plus an additional 10 millimeters. I hope that this makes sense. Just hang on a second, we're going to repeat this, right? Repetition is key in all learning. So just to repeat, start with the bottom height, make sure your cutter goes to the depth you want. Then the next of these kind of like build upon each other, kind of like going up. Okay, now I'm going to show you a pretty neat tip to kind of like where we can talk a little bit about this. So for this operation, I'm just going to hit OK for this adaptive, let it process it. Here's a neat tool you maybe don't know about. If you right click on an operation, there's a command called View Toolpath. Click on that, and we actually get this really, now this is not the posted code, but it's a reference code for our part. And what you will see is that there is an XYZ, XYZ, and so on for this whole thing. And it shows us kind of like going through the entire cut. And if you click here, you will actually see that the tool will follow along. So this is a great way. If you are a little bit unsecure, you're programming something, you know, this is a good way to kind of like work your way through this, right? Now, this one here is a little bit interesting because it does have the helix on it, right? We're doing a helix ramp for this adaptive. And not to try to make it more confusing, but the helix is actually, if I go ahead and edit this toolpath, is controlled on the linking tab over here, right? And that actually has a vertical lead in, lead out radius on top of that, okay? So what happens is that when it comes to the top height, then it's going to add this 1.6 vertical lead in to the top, and that's where the cut's going to start. So maybe this is not the best one to look at. Maybe we should look at, let's look at this one instead, the contour, just because the helix might make it a little bit more confusing. So let's go and look at the contour here, edit this one, go back in and look at the heights tab, right? So this one here actually has an extra one. It has a feed height on it. So again, don't worry about it. Start at the bottom. What is the selected contour? In this case, it is again selected contour. So what was the selected contour? That was what I selected down at the bottom of the pocket. So no panic there. We got that. Then it's asking, okay, what is the top height? Again, it's set to the stock top. Okay, and the stock top comes out of our setup, like I said before. What do we have here versus, you know, with that number set right there? Okay, so that is the stock top here. Then we have a feed height. Now the feed height is set to the top height. That is this one. So it's the top height plus an additional 5 millimeters. So stock top plus another 5 millimeters. That's when it's going to start feeding. It's going to go into a feed rate mode. So it's going to go from a rapid to a feed rate. We have, again, the retract height going from one pocket to the other pocket, but it's also stock top plus 5. So these two are actually the same, right? Because the top height is stock top plus 5, and up here, retract height is stock top plus 5. I mean, you could go in here and you could change this to top height, and that would be kind of like the same thing. And then on top of that, we have the clearance height. So the rabbit for the beginning of the operation, what is the top height plus 5 plus another additional 10. So they're building on top of each other. Does this make sense? They're like, I hope this makes sense. Start with the bottom, and then they're kind of like building up on each other. Okay, I'm sorry if this is if I'm making it. I'm not meaning to make it more confusing than it is. So to go back to where we were before with the linking tab with the lead in, you will see here we have this vertical lead in radius, and we could change that to maybe, let's just do it 2, so some number we can kind of like see in the code. And if we now go and right click and do that toolpath compare, and we look at this, we will see that the first one is 15 millimeter rapid. So the tool will come from the tool change position. It will go to 15 rapid. It will go down, whoops, I'm moving my mouse here. That was not good. Let's go in so we can kind of maybe see a little bit better. So the first one is 15 rapid, then it's going to go to 5 rapid above, okay? Then it's going to plunge down to 1 inch. So this is kind of like our start feeding point, and then it's going to go down to that 2 vertical that I changed on the linking tab, and then go down to 16 is the finished depth, okay? And then it's going to start machining around this part. When it gets to the point where it's going to lead out, it will go 2 up, because that was a vertical lead on the linking. It will wrap it up 5. Now, I can't spin it around with this menu open, but this 5 here is that top height is the top height, or the stock top plus 5, right? And then it will do another move over. That is in the way. That was our retract height. Is this move here? Your toolpath. So that is our. It's going up. This is our retract move. Then it's going to go down 1, down 2 millimeters above the radius, and then down to the depth. That's kind of like how that works. And it's really the same. Like if we're going to look, so I added a 3D adaptive because I wanted to show you that if you go in and look at the 3D adaptive, what roughed out that cone shape here, you will see it's the exact same kind of idea, except this one by default go to model bottom, but because it's a free axis toolpath, a 3D toolpath, it is not controlled by a selection. It's actually controlled by where there is material. So it knows in this case, I can't cut into material. That's one of the great things about 3-axis toolpath that you find up here, is that it will not gouge into to the material. But you could use this to, for example, set a selection. Okay, so I could go in here and say, well, I only wanted to machine to maybe, and you can select a vertice right here, and I could select that point, and now of course it can't machine any deeper than that point, but we'll just do kind of like a flat, versus if I tell you go as deep as you want, in this case it's always set to model bottom because it cannot gouge into the material, you will now see that it's going to go all the way kind of like down to the bottom. But everything else within the 3D toolpath, even though this is model bottom, but everything else in here works the exact same way. They're built on top of one another. Now, before I go to the drilling, well, let's do the drilling, and then I go one step backwards. Let me open the half an hour too. The drilling, let's go ahead and edit that one. Heights tab. We get a couple of more options down here. Now, it's set to hold bottom, and be aware of, with drilling, be aware of that the top height is normally set to hold top. So if you had a counter bore, for example, there was an extra step down here, and you selected the smaller diameter, be aware that the whole top would be at the top of that smaller hole. I should have created a counter bore. So you might have to go in here, instead of say whole top, maybe select model top, for example. In this case, it's going to be the same. That's one thing to be aware of with holes. But these up here are exactly the same as we just talked about the other one. They build on top of these here. Now you also get an option here to drill tip through the bottom, which is really handy. You check that, and now you can add a little bit of breakthrough, because normally if you have like a jobber drill, it has 118 degrees angle here, so you could go in here and say, I like to go 5 millimeters, not offset. I want to go 5 millimeters breakthrough here, and you will see that now I make sure that my drill goes past the drill tip. Of course, make sure you don't drill into anything like the table or something like that. So that little caution. So that is what we have with the drilling. Now the other thing I wanted to show you that you maybe are not aware of, if you go into the toolpath that I'm created here, where I machined around it, you can actually do something a little bit maybe more advanced, or at least, I don't know, you should be aware of some of these functions inside of Fusion. You can actually go in and you can create kind of rules in any field that has kind of like these fields in them. You can actually make expressions. And to me, this is like, it gets a little geeky, and definitely not something you have to learn to be able to use Fusion. But if I right click in here in one of these white areas, you get a couple of options. First of all, you can make any of these fields default, what is super good. If you know that every time you use start to leave, you don't like to have 0.1 millimeters, you're sick and tired of always changing this to 1 millimeter like this, well, you can just go in here and right click and say make this default, and from now on, anytime I do a 2D contour and I click start to leave, it will always be 1 millimeter instead of 0.1 millimeter. That is super helpful. And if you change your mind, you can always right click in there again and say reset to default in there, and it will go back to a reset to built-in default, but it's kind of like you know, how Fusion came, and it will switch back to that. That's one thing. The other thing that is in here is there's something called expressions. You can click here and you actually get a field up here. If we go into the adaptive, I'm going to wrap this up in just a second. But if we go into adaptive, many people ask me about this optimal load. And I did a live stream on adaptive clearing. So if this is something you want to know more about, search the live streams or send me an email and I'll send you a link to it. But if I right click in here and set edit expression, you will actually see that this optimal load actually has kind of like a formula to it. Tool diameter times 0.4. So this optimal load will change by default the tool diameter times 0.4. Now you can change this. If you find out on your machine that 0.3 would be better, then you can change that and you can now make that the default, and then you're all set. We can actually also use it on the heights tab, what could be kind of interesting. If I go in this tool here right now, and I change this tool, this is this 16 flat end mill. What if I change that to a radius cutter? So right now it's a flat end mill. If I change that to a bullnose end mill or radius cutter, whatever you want, and we're gonna add a corner radius in here for example 3. So now we got a 3 millimeter radius down here. Now if I go in and say okay to that and let it process it, creating it around this part here, well, if you have done any machining, you know that with this depth here, that is, you know, we will have that little radius there. Just so you know, you could actually go in here, hit edit, and you could go into your heights tab. And I won't, again, if you're doing this if this is a problem you're running into all the time, right click in here, edit expression, right? And I could go in here, hang on a second, it's thinking about it. I think, there we go. I could go in here and I could change this to an expression. Now, I don't have the list for expressions. I know somebody created it at one point, but if I go in here and I type in minus tool underscore, you need to know what these are, of course, radius. Okay, if I'm going to type that, that means that now it will always go minus what the corner radius is on whatever tool I select. In our case, 3 millimeters. So now when I hit OK, you will now see that the depth is going to be, you know, 3 millimeters deeper to make sure I don't get that radius don't affect that bottom. To prove that we actually did it right, let's go back in and change the tool again. And let's make it, I don't know, 4? I don't know why that's not really exciting, but 4 it is. And let's go in here and regenerate that. Edit it. And now you will see that it automatically changed it to 4. I hope this is not, you know, this would be great here, but of course I'm using the same tool on finishing these pockets. But when right now it looks good, but when I regenerate this, they are gonna go too deep too. Oh no, they will not. Oh, because I didn't make it default, right? I didn't make it a default in the other one. I just put it in for contour. So if I wanted that to stick all the time, I would now have to click in here and say make it default, and then whenever I select it or regenerate it, then it will be in there. I don't want a default. I'm going to go ahead and say reset to build. But I hope that kind of makes sense. So a little bit more advanced in the end, hopefully not too confusing. To wrap it up, just start from the bottom, make sure that one is good. That should be pretty self-explanatory where those numbers come from, and just work your way up. If there is any confusion, right-click, select View Toolpath, and you can actually click through each step and see that cutter machine around. And you got the Z value over here. And don't forget that it depends, these numbers in here, in these C values in here are deriving from the setup. So in our case here, we had set the 0, 0 to be on top, that 1 millimeter on top of the stock. What is what we had over here? Okay. I hope that this was useful. You let me know. Thumbs up if it is. Thumbs down if it's not. Hope the intro was not too long. But again, Wednesday night, a little after 8, we will sit down and we'll do some modeling for beginners on Facebook. That was what I was yapping about in the beginning if you came a little bit late. So tonight, a little bit after 8 p.m. Eastern, for beginners, and it's going to be kind of very casual. If you have any questions, I will answer them, try to answer them live. Again, keeping it on beginner mode, just to kind of like help people, try to add some more value. I am going to end it right here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to watch this. As usual, I'm going to end the recording. So if you're watching the recording of this, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to jump into the live stream and say hi to all the wonderful people in there. Take care, guys.